Do what matters to you with the end in mind. Today, we have a wonderful guest speaker, Maureen Kures, and she will be educating us about the value of advanced care planning. Maureen has had over 30 years as an oncology nurse. She has worked in ICU and she has also worked in hospice. So she has seen a lot of different issues come up around end of life wishes and advanced care planning. Maureen is the owner of Radiant Mourning. And welcome, Maureen. We are so happy to have you.
Thanks, Talea. Thank you so much all for being here. I'm very excited to talk about this subject. You know, not everyone likes to talk about end of life or death, but for me, it is just such a joy to be able to share this with you and possibly impact your end of life or the impact, the end of life of those that you love. So I hope this is an opportunity for you to learn. A lot of the things that the pandemic has changed about advanced care planning is I think that we are more aware of the need of it right now. The basic premises haven't changed. It's just the delivery method. We can do, everyone's so in tune to Zoom now that it's so easy to present it online just in a format like this. So to get started, as Talea said, I have a background in end of life nursing. I got my first job out of nursing school in an oncology unit, and I thought, oh, yuck, I don't want to work with dying people. I'm going to get out of there as fast as I can. What I didn't know is that I would fall in love and change the trajectory of my nursing career. I fell in love with the patients, I fell in love with their families, and I fell in love with that journey. So that's where my passion comes from, is trying to influence someone's end of life journey. So I want you to take a moment and I want you to imagine with me a story. So the story I want you to imagine is that you have planned your dream trip to Paris. You have been planning it for 2 years. You've been budgeting, you've been saving, and you have everything in order. You're so excited. You have budgeted so you can stay at just the nicest hotel. You have restaurant reservations across town. You even have one that's at a Michelin star restaurant. You have your tours and museum passes all in order. You have that vision of riding the elevator to the top of the Eiffel Tower and looking at the beautiful view of Paris. You envision yourself walking down the Champs-Élysées and seeing all the wonderful shops and climbing the stairs to Sacré-Cœur and seeing the city from that area where all the artists gather. Well, you have planned so well. You've planned your wardrobe down to the just absolute T. You have it planned for the weather and each event, and you've been packed for a week. The big day comes and you're so excited. You take that luggage that you've packed and you head off to the airport extra early because you don't want to miss a thing. You sit there at the gate waiting and they call for you to board the flight, and you come, you sit in your chair, you get all settled in, and you are just in the throes of excitement. You eat the airline food. It's not nearly as good as that Michelin star restaurant you're going to be eating in. And you watch a few movies, and then you settle down and you take a nice nap because you want to be just fresh as can be when you land in Paris so you can hit the ground running and not miss a thing. You're woken up by the flight attendant coming on the loudspeaker saying, please fasten your seatbelts and bring your tray tables to their locked and upright positions. We are going to be landing in Poland in 20 minutes. And you think, Poland? Wait, no, I'm going to Paris. There must be some mistake. I'm not going to Poland. How could this be? You call the flight attendant over and you say, wait, I'm going to Paris. And she said, well, this flight's landing in Poland. and you are thrown into drama, trauma, and chaos. You have no idea what to do. This isn't what you planned for. This isn't what you've lived for and executed so well over the last 2 years. How could this happen? What do? You just don't know. You're not prepared. That story plays out every single day in hospital ICUs across this country. It plays out when your 62-year-old mother is placed on a ventilator in the ICU. It plays out when your 23-year-old son has a skateboarding accident and ends up with a brain injury and quadriplegic. And it plays out when your spouse slips and falls while you're on vacation and ends up dying 3 days later of a cerebral hemorrhage. These people were unprepared. It's not what they had planned. They had their life in order. How could this be? They're thrown into drama, trauma, and chaos because they don't know what to do. They've never talked about a scenario like this. Those 3 scenarios are real. I was the nurse that took care of every single one of those patients, and I took care of many more just like it. They didn't know what to do because they had never talked about these kinds of things happening. They hadn't planned. We planned so well for weddings, graduations, the birth of a baby, even planning for our vacations or which food we're going to eat for dinner this night. But we don't plan for our end of life and what can happen. So that's what I want to talk to you about today. I want you to all be aware of the gift of planning for the inevitable to happen. Death's 100% certain. We're not getting out of this life alive. So let's plan for it so that we can fully live our lives. So advanced care planning is all about thinking about your goals of care, your values, and your preferences. So advanced care planning is getting all of the your plans and your desires in order. Advanced directives are the written documents, the documents that are legally drafted, or they can be drafted. There's so many different healthcare agent documents, living wills they're called. There's something called the 5 wishes you can use, and having those notarized or witnessed. It depends on your state. So whichever state you're in, look and see what the legal ramifications are, what the legal requirements are for end-of-life planning. That gives you the gift of having someone that can make legal decisions for you in the event that you can't make them yourself. So if any of you would like to unmute and tell me, do you have any fears around end-of-life planning? I'm going to share, I am working with a client right now, and she has a lot of fear around end-of-life planning. She is fearful that by doing this planning and talking about it, she is going to manifest her end of life much sooner. That's a very, very common fear. And it's one that I think that you need to know that that's common, and it's okay to have that fear. Like I said, people don't like talking about death. It's scary, and it's scary to contemplate our own death. So just know that by doing this work, I've never met one person that's manifested their own death by it, but it is a common and real fear. There's 3 decisions that are important for end-of-life planning. I'm going to go over the 3, and then I will review them in a little more detail. One is choosing your healthcare agent, also called healthcare power of attorney, healthcare surrogate, healthcare advocate. There's so many different names, but essentially it is the person that will speak on your behalf should you become unable to do so. And that's a really important person to decide on. The other are cultural, spiritual, religious beliefs. And then the third is goal of care. Those are the 3 decisions that influence our goals, values, and preferences at end of life. So I want to talk about how to choose a power of attorney or a healthcare advocate. I tend to call them powers of attorney. That's a legal document that you can have drafted by an attorney, or one that you can even go to Staples and get it. But that is the one that gives legal authority to your healthcare agent, to the power of attorney to speak on your behalf. So your healthcare agent, there's some criteria. They have to be over 18 years old. They have to be willing to step in and be your healthcare agent. So you want to ask them. Don't just make the decision and say, okay, they're going to be my healthcare agent and it's all done. It's something that requires a pretty in-depth conversation. But first, to ask, are you willing to take on this role and responsibility for me? I will share a story. I was chosen to be a healthcare agent unbeknownst to me. It happened, one of my dear friends, she was like my adopted mother here in Seattle, went in for a routine, well, a laparoscopic surgery. It wasn't routine. They were exploring for cancer. Her bowel ruptured during the middle of surgery, and she was rushed to the ICU on every machine imaginable. Well, I was notified that I was her power of attorney along with another friend of hers. We were co-powers of attorney. And I'm going to tell you my opinion on that. She was on every form of life support there could be. And we were thrown into drama, trauma, and chaos because we had never addressed any of these. I didn't even know I was in this position. That's the importance of asking. The importance of having a single healthcare advocate is when you have co-healthcare advocates, there can be disagreement. That's what happened. This man that I didn't know very well, he had convinced her before she went to surgery to fill out this, healthcare advocate form, and she chose me to go along with him. We had very different outlooks. His outlook was save her at all cost, and mine, I went to my nursing background because I didn't know what her wishes were. So I relied on my experience, and I saw this beloved friend. Her chance of survival was very low. And so we were in conflict, this man and I. The importance of not having powers of attorney is strong because of that conflict that can happen. It's best to have your primary advocate, a secondary advocate, and even you can have a third if you want. The reason it's important to have a secondary advocate is because if your primary advocate is unable to speak on your behalf, if they change their mind when the crisis happens, or there's a possibility, let's say you two are driving along together and you're in an accident, and that person becomes unable to speak for themselves or for you. That's the power and the importance of having a secondary power of attorney. So ask them. Ask the primary, ask the secondary. We often think that our family members are the best people to be our healthcare powers of attorney, healthcare advocates, and that is not always the case because it is a very emotional time when you have to be a healthcare power of attorney, healthcare advocate, and make that decision to not do anything or make that decision to do everything. It's never an easy, clear-cut choice. So have the conversation and ask. By sharing with them your wishes, your specific wishes, that takes away their uncertainty. They won't feel that uncertainty of what to do because you've already told them. They won't feel unprepared. They won't feel conflicted. I felt conflicted because I was placing my beliefs onto my friend. And that is an area of conflict. By sharing your end-of-life wishes, you don't get into the moral distress that can happen because you know their wishes. Whether you agree with them or not, it doesn't matter. It matters that you honor and respect them. And as the healthcare advocate, when you're choosing a healthcare advocate, you want to make sure you're choosing someone that will honor and respect your end-of-life wishes, whether they agree with them or not. You also want to choose someone that is strong enough to advocate for you, to be that healthcare agent, that healthcare advocate. It's not easy. I'm going to share the story. My beloved uncle, he was 88, and I was his healthcare advocate because he knew his daughter would be too emotional. She was his only surviving relative. His two sons and his wife had already died, and he knew it would be too emotional for her. So he had asked me. We had many, many long conversations about what quality of life was for him and what would make life worth living for him. There's something called your best day. And if you want to think about what would be quality of life for me, think about what is your best day? What would be okay for you? He and I had had that conversation many times. He was 88. And on a Friday afternoon, he had gone to his golfing kickoff luncheon for the season. He was really looking forward to it. I spoke to him Friday later in the afternoon. Saturday morning, he didn't wake up, but he wasn't dead. He didn't wake up. He had a big cerebral bleed into his head, and he was taken to the hospital down in Palm Desert. And I was called by the neurosurgeon because I was on record as his power of attorney. They really pushed me to go in and do surgery. This neurosurgeon pushed me to go in and do neurosurgery to evacuate the bleed from his head. And I said, will he be able to play golf as he anticipated yesterday? And the response was, well, no, but we can most likely get him speaking again. And I said, will he be able to play golf as he had anticipated yesterday? Well, no, but we can get him back to some sort of functioning. The fifth time I asked him, and I kept saying no, and he kept trying. The fifth time I asked him, he asked me, or I asked him about him playing golf. I said, no, the answer is no. No surgery, comfort measures only. And it broke my heart because this is my beloved uncle, who we all thought, my gosh, he was so active. We thought he'd live well into his 90s as an active person. And he died later that day. And even though it was hard, I knew I had to honor his wishes because we had had so many conversations. So you want to choose someone that will honor those difficult decisions, that will honor your wishes and be able to make those difficult decisions. Doctors don't always like to admit that the end is here. And so having someone that can do that for you is very important. The next thing is cultural and religious, spiritual values. Our values are based on all of these things. They guide our cultural, spiritual, and religious beliefs guide our goals, our values and preferences. When I was a young nurse, there was a man with cancer. I want to say he was Hmong. I don't really remember what nationality he was. He did not speak English. The majority of his family did not, but they kept coming in as he was dying and pinning money to his hospital gown. And I thought that was so interesting. And finally, a family member came in that spoke English, and he told me that is their belief, that they have to have money to continue on their journey. And that influenced that family's goals, values, and preferences for this man's end of life. So that's a very important thing to take into consideration as you are thinking about your end of life. The next thing is the goals of care. Our goals of care, what do we want to get out of our end of life planning? What is important to us? What is that good day? What are we willing to try for our end of life? I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But our goals of care will help clarify things if we are faced with cognitive impairment from an accident. We all think that we can put this off till we're older. We're not anywhere near death. And we don't want to think about it right now, but every adult should be thinking about this because we don't know when that accident will happen. And I think that's one of the things COVID has shown us. We don't know what can happen from one day to the next. There's a lot of people, over 170,000, that never expected to be gone right now, that never expected to die. And so COVID has given us the clarity of the importance of these goals of care. So now I'm going to jump into life-limiting illnesses. Life-limiting illnesses, a lot of you are cancer survivors or going through cancer treatment. A life-limiting illness, in my opinion, is when you are given a prognosis of a year or less to live. So that will dictate your decisions on care. It'll dictate if you choose life support or not. There's no right or wrong answer. And it's all based on what you want for yourself at this time. Some of the life support, I'm going to review life support. CPR, you've probably all heard of cardiopulmonary resuscitation. We see it in the movies and on TV all the time. You know, my favorite show used to be ER. I'm dating myself because it was a long time ago. But you know, gosh, they go in, they do CPR, pump on the chest, you know, for a few seconds, 30 seconds, and the people survive and walk out of the hospital over 66% of the time. Over 66% of the time on TV, it's successful. In real life, the statistics aren't that promising. In real life, if you're a hospitalized patient, CPR is successful about 15% of the time. Could be a little more, could be a little less. And that's from birth till elder death. So 15% of the time it's successful. If you are a frail elderly person, it's successful less than 5% of the time if you're hospitalized. And if you have a life-limiting illness, it's successful less than 1% of the time. Those are sort of sobering facts. So I really encourage you to explore CPR. I did put a sheet in the resources that Talea is going to send to you. And I have some more in-depth information if you decide you would like to learn any more about CPR. The thing with CPR is that a lot of people might survive, and you have to wonder what is the cognitive impairment because of CPR. Oftentimes, more often than not, there is some sort of cognitive impairment because it depends on how long the blood flow to the brain, the oxygen to the brain has been cut off. The next thing I want to talk about is do not resuscitate, DNR. We all think we're DNR, so no problem. DNRs are standard. They are honored when you're in the hospital or a clinic setting. It could be the hospital, a nursing facility, assisted care, or the doctor's office. I was working in a clinic and we had someone, I was helping out some oncologists on my days off when they had lost their nurses, and they had a patient that came in. Well, he actually died in the office, but they knew he was a DNR and they honored that. They honored that do not resuscitate. Now the DNR does not carry over outside of those settings. You know, I've heard people say, but they had a medical bracelet that said do not resuscitate, and they resuscitated them anyway. That's what paramedics legally have to do unless you have a POLST form. The POLST form is called Physician Order for Life-Sustaining Treatment. It could also be called provider form or provider order. It has to be signed by a healthcare provider. Your doctor, nurse practitioner, physician assistant, I think, can even sign in many states. A POLST form is for people that have, usually they have less than a year to live. You know, many people that are 65 say, oh, I need a POLST form. Well, not really. If you're healthy, there's no reason to have it, because if you're healthy and they were to perform CPR, let's say you're grocery shopping and drop dead, your heart stops. If they perform CPR, there might be a good chance that you would survive and go on living. So, you know, you really have to talk to your doctor about that physician order for life-sustaining treatment and when it's right for you, if you have decided on the DNR. Now, I always say, if you are in that that frame of time, less than a year, you have the pulse form. Usually ours in Washington State is bright green, and we tell people to tape it to their refrigerator somewhere. If the paramedics had to come in, they can look. They know to look on the refrigerator is a common place. But hey, make a copy and tape it to your chest if you're going out. I don't know. But if you're outside, even without that pulse form, if they don't have that pulse form, they will have to revive you. Ventilation, the ventilators, many people refer them to as respirators. That is the tube that is placed down that provides oxygen into your lungs, that can send oxygen through your bloodstream to maintain the function of your organs. This is so helpful in so many cases. You know, if you are in an accident and you need just assistance for a short time, they know you'll recover, or statistically you should recover. Ventilation is a very good thing. If you're at end of life and there's not really much hope, then it's something that you have to think about. You have to think, at what point would I be willing to be put on a ventilator? If they say there's 25% chance of me surviving, is that good for you? Does it have to be 50% or 75%, or maybe you never want it? So these are important things to really think about. At what point would I be willing to have be put on a ventilator for life-sustaining treatment, life support, life-sustaining treatment? I'm going to share a story. My mom's friend, her good friend for many, many, many years, 2 weeks ago today, she's in her early 80s. She was in her early 80s. She collapsed at home. She had cancer for over 7 years. The last year of her life, she'd been in and out of hospitals with heart issues, and she had been going downhill. She collapsed, and her husband called the paramedics. They took her to the hospital. Her heart hadn't stopped. She was not responsive, but her heart hadn't stopped. She was still breathing. So the paramedics took her to the hospital, and, you know, because of COVID, her husband was allowed in the emergency room with her, but her children were not. They were all gathered outside the hospital, and the doctor informed her husband, without being put on life support, she would not survive the night. So he went out and communicated this to his children, and their oldest daughter, they had never really talked about it, besides her mom flippantly saying, I never want to be put on one of those breathing machines. She had said it to my mom and their friends many times, but they had never really had in-depth conversations. Her daughter, in that emotion and conflict and moral distress, she convinced her dad to put her on a ventilator so that she could survive. She survived for 8 days. She didn't make it. They finally decided to take her off. Her husband said, enough's enough, and took her off. Her systems were failing, her organs were failing, and they were not being able to support her blood pressure to do anything for that. She never got home. She ended up dying at the hospital. They were trying to get her home so she could die at home. This is very common. 80% of people say they want to die at home, yet only about 20% do. So think about that. At what phase would you really want to say, yes, I want to try everything, or no, let me go peacefully? And then have those conversations. I'm going to keep reiterating that. Have those conversations with your family. If they had talked more openly, her daughter might have been able to handle that. Next thing I'm going to move on to is feeding and nutrition. It's artificial nutrition through either a gastric tube, also called a G tube, or an NG tube, which is something that's placed down your nose. There's many reasons to do this. Many of us have heard of Terry Schiavo. Years ago, she was on life support, which was the feeding and nutrition, for many, many years, and her husband had to petition the court to get her off against her parents' will. Parents wanted everything done. And there was a lot of turmoil around that in our country. That kept her alive much longer than she should have. Now, my cousin's husband, he had been diagnosed with colon cancer. He had to have a colon resection and a colostomy bag, and they put a gastric tube in to give him artificial nutrition for the 3 months they thought it would take his body to heal. And so he would have adequate nutrition to help with that healing. 3 months later, he got it out. Many years later, he's doing great. So, you know, with the life support, life sustaining treatments, I encourage you to do research around this as you're making your decisions for your advanced care planning. There's never a right or wrong answer. It's the answer or decision. It's all your decision. You get to make what's the decision that's right for you. Now, once you've made those decisions, it's so important to share them with your family and with those that matter most. So those that matter most, family, healthcare agent, it's really important so they know, as I explained so fully a few minutes ago, that the importance of sharing your wishes with your healthcare agent, because they might have to make tough decisions down the road, and having your game plan, your roadmap, if you will, makes it so much easier for them. And sharing it with your family allows them to support your healthcare agent. It allows them to support your end of life wishes. It's when they don't talk about it that it's so hard and the conflict arises. I've seen it both ways. I've seen it where there's been a healthcare agent, oftentimes a family member, and they didn't ever talk. The patient never talked to the family, and there was total conflict, and the healthcare agent was trying to do what the patient wanted, yet the family wanted something different, and there was fighting and fracture because of that. That's the importance of sharing it with your family. It's a gift to them, and it's a gift to your healthcare agent. The next most important person after you share with those is your healthcare provider. Sharing it with your healthcare provider. You know, doctors were trained, doctors, nurses, nurse practitioners. We were all trained to heal and save lives, especially doctors. They're not trained really to support end of life. Surprisingly enough, oncologists, I was always shocked that they had a hard time letting go of their patients. It's an emotional time. We get attached, and it's hard to admit that end of life is near. So there's not a lot of good training in medical school. It's getting better, especially now that palliative care has become such a popular subspecialty. Not popular enough, in my opinion, but it's a popular subspecialty. But that's opened more conversations in medical schools and with physicians. But most don't like to talk about this. So by sharing your wishes, taking your advanced care plan into them and discussing it with them, that's a gift you give not only yourself, but you give your doctor. And ask them, are you able to honor my wishes? Because you want a doctor that will honor your wishes and not try to push your family for something that you don't want at your end of life. Why it matters, I just shared, because it matters so that people know and can honor and respect the wishes and the choices you've made for yourself. The benefits of sharing your end of life wishes are peace of mind for you, knowing that your wishes will be honored, peace of mind for your family and those that matter most to you, because they have that clear roadmap, and they'll never have to worry and guess and stress over, did I make the right decision? Did I do what she would have wanted or he would have wanted? Because they knew right from you what to do. There's less depression after the loss of a loved one in people who have had these conversations. They're still grieving. We're always going to grieve. Gosh, 11 years later, I still grieve for my dad. The grief doesn't go away. It changes over time. But there have been studies about depression in the survivors after a death of a loved one, and it is much less prevalent in the people that speak about it. PTSD. The PTSD comes from traumatic death in the ICU. There are studies on PTSD because of this. You know, I have a friend, I was doing a course and a workshop, and she was really excited to attend. she had to leave early because it brought up all this horrible feelings and grief around her sister, who at 22, her sister was in an accident and ended up dying a traumatic death in the ICU. And she was distraught over this. That was over 30 years ago. That impacted her. She didn't think it would. It came out of nowhere. That's what PTSD does. So by talking about it well before, by getting your ducks in a row now, and having these conversations, I've had these conversations with my 20-something kids and my husband. We've gotten our kids together. And through that conversation that we had as a family, I learned what they would want if they had a traumatic injury, because most likely they're healthy now. If anything happened, it would be a traumatic accident. And so we were able to learn what they wanted. I learned that my one son wants his brain donated to a concussion study at Boston University. I never would have known that without talking to him. So if I'm ever put in that position, even though I will be grief-stricken, I will know what his wishes are and be able to honor and respect them. So a quick recap. We learned about goals, values, and preferences, and the importance of getting them in order. We touched on advanced care planning and advanced directives. I talked about the importance of choosing a healthcare agent and the steps to go through. I also put a resource page in your packet. And goals of care. That's the decisions you want to make for your own end of life. We talked about life-limiting illness and life support, life-sustaining treatment. And we also just touched on the importance of conversation. So I could talk about this all day, and I've probably gone way over, but I'm going to wrap it up here. And this is just touching on the importance of it. So thank you all so much for joining me today. And I would love to answer any questions that you might have.
Maureen, thank you so much for